Have you ever felt trapped? Not trapped by walls or chains or any physical obstacle, but by the people around you? Maybe you spent a long day at school or work with your superior breathing down your neck. Now imagine that's all you know. Imagine privacy being a foreign concept, every waking second defined by the stimuli of others. Do you think you would behave the same? Do you think you would even be yourself? In 1973, an American ethologist and behavioral researcher named John B. Calhoun published a paper which he called Death Squared: The Explosive Growth and Demise of a Mouse Population. This paper received overwhelming feedback both professionally and publicly. It outlined an experiment involving an enclosure known as Universe 25, along with its subsequent demise and a grim prediction on the future of the human race. Universe 25 was not Calhoun's first experiment involving rodents. In fact, to truly understand the nature of Calhoun's experiments, we have to go back. John Bumpus Calhoun was the third child born to James and Fern Calhoun in the small town of Elkton, Tennessee. By junior high school, young Calhoun had moved to Nashville, where he published his first article titled The Migrant, which dove into bird migration. Calhoun then attended Northwestern, where he earned his PhD with his thesis, 24-Hour Rhythms of the Norway Rat. Calhoun, now free to pursue his interests, began a 28-month study at Johns Hopkins University on a colony of Norway rats in a 10,000 square foot outdoor pen. Through this study, Calhoun observed some interesting phenomenon. 5 female rats over this time could theoretically produce 5,000 healthy children in this pen size. The pen's population, however, never exceeded 200 individuals. The rats organized themselves into 12 to 13 local colonies, each consisting of a dozen rats. 12 rats seemed to be the maximum number that could live harmoniously in a natural group. Exceeding this number led to stress and negative psychological effects, which ultimately would break the group up. That is, unless the group had no room to break up. Calhoun's next experiment was documented in his article, Population Density and Social Pathology. It took place on the Casey farm on the second floor of a huge barn located outside of Rockville, Maryland. In the center of the second floor of this barn sat a 10 by 14 foot box, standing at 9 feet tall. This box was internally divided into 4 rooms, along with a door for the researchers to enter. On the ceiling of each room was a glass window, through which researchers could monitor the rats within. Each room contained a few essential things: an artificial burrow, a feeding station, and a drinking station. The rats were supplied with both unlimited food and water, along with ample nesting material. These rooms were separated by a 2-foot electric fence. The only way to traverse between these rooms for the rats was via an elevated ramp that connected certain rooms. Labeling these rooms 1 through 4 going clockwise from the door, room 1 was connected to 2, 2 was connected to 3, and 3 was connected to 4, but room 4 is not connected to room 1. This essentially created 2 rooms with only one access point. Each burrow was elevated, the height of which varied for each of the rooms. Although the height of the burrow had no noticeable effect on the experiment, each burrow consisted of 5 nest boxes, as you can see in room 1 where the top of the burrow is removed. The test subjects for this experiment are an albino strain of the Norway rat, and the experiment itself was repeated on 6 different rat populations. The first 3 populations began with 32 rats, and the second 3 began with 56. In all populations, there was an even male and female distribution. Each experiment spanned a period of 16 months. This is a given day in the box. Calhoun coined a term, behavioral sink. This describes a collapse in a behavior which can result from overcrowding. This phenomenon is blatant throughout Calhoun's experiments. For example, the rats in this experiment were forced to be in close proximity while eating because of the feeder design. As a result of this, rats started to only eat in groups. Eating together became a social norm only because of the nature of the rat's environment. Over the course of the experiments, it became a trend that about 75% of the animals crowded into one of the 4 pens to eat. Rats tended to congregate in pens 2 and 3, while pens 1 and 4, a dominant male, was usually able to expel all of their males and possess a harem of females. This created a gender disparity in pens 2 and 3. A quick biology lesson for rats: female rats release a hormone when they are in heat, which can be detected by male rats. The rat approaching the bottom ramp is a female in heat who is being pursued by a pack of males. This was a common trend in pens 2 and 3. The uneven gender distribution created an environment where female rats were being abused. Females in the end pens weren't safe, however. Once a male established dominion over an end pen and the harem within, he became a perpetual guard. These rats would generally sleep at the base of the ramp for their pen. They would have to wake up and potentially fight as soon as another male appeared at the head of the ramp. In contrast, dominant males often wouldn't stir to the sound of female rats in their harem traveling up and down the wire ramp to their nesting box. This created restless dominants who would sometimes lash out at their harem. There are a few notable groups of male rats that emerged during this experiment. The dominant males, as said before, controlled the 2 side pens of the enclosure. They watched over their harem from the rats in pens 2 and 3. The fight for dominance was never-ending, and often power struggles would lead to new alpha males. These rats are relatively normal and seldom attacked either females or juveniles. These animals couldn't discriminate from appropriate and inappropriate sex partners. They made sexual advances towards males, juveniles, and females not in heat. The males in the same group, along with the dominant males, usually accepted their advances. They often weren't attacked by the dominant males, yet rarely fought for status. These rats lived outside of the society. They ignored all other rats and in turn moved through the community without contention. They wouldn't even attempt to mate with the females in heat. They appeared to be the healthiest and most attractive of the rat community, as they were fat and sleek, and they had none of the bare spots usually created through fighting. The strangest and most disturbing of the rat population was given the title probers. They were the most active of the rats, and although not participating in the status struggle, actively got attacked by the dominant males. They were hypersexual, homosexual, and cannibalistic. Constantly in the hunt for females in heat, they would lie in wait at the top of ramps and peer into the brood pens until the territorial rat saw them and chased them away. Mating often involves a courtship ritual, where the female being pursued retires to her burrow while the male waits quietly outside, sometimes peeking but never entering. The female then emerges and often a courtship dance is performed before mating. This ritual is followed for the most part among the normal heterosexual rats, but not among the probers. The probers would not tolerate any waiting. They would often follow the female straight into their burrows. On these expeditions, the probers often found dead young in the nests. As a result, they tended to become cannibalistic in the later months of the experiment. Shortly after a male rat reached maturity, at about 6 months of age, they would enter into a round robin of fights that would place them in the social hierarchy. Dominant rats would wait until other rats of the side pens went to eat, and on their return would bar them from entry. Rather than driving out the lesser rats, the dominant males simply had to stop them from returning. Throughout the course of these experiments, some interesting recurring patterns emerged. The abnormal social behaviors of the rats led to dwindling fertility rates among females. The constant abuse from the probers in the middle pens led to females that were progressively less and less adept at building nests for their young. Throughout the months, the females' nests often became more and more bare until they made no attempt at all at nest building and simply had their litters on the sawdust of the floor in the burrow boxes. The females of the middle pens often lost the ability to transport their litters from one place to another. Infants were often left scattered around the pen where they were seldom nursed. Hence they would die where they were dropped and then would get eaten by the adults. Females hunted by probers while in heat would develop disorders that would consequently lead to high female death rates during pregnancy. Calhoun would describe these trends as behavioral sinks, and they proved fatal to the rat community in this experiment. Males became more and more socially disoriented, and female populations and fertility rates dwindled. Even the females in the end pens weren't safe from this trend. Infant mortality rates reached a staggering 96% in the middle pens, while in end pens it sat around 80%. It's clear from Calhoun's experiment that high population density can erode necessary social functions. Calhoun's article stressed the relevance of his findings for the human race. We can already see the relevance of his findings in the news every morning. Crime rates are higher in more urbanized areas, and the community is often cast aside for self-benefit. Rats and humans aren't the same, and these results can't be directly applied, but the relevance of the results is blatant. This article proved to be Calhoun's first widely influential experiment, but what he had planned next would shadow his prior works. Cahoon's article, Death Squared, The Explosive Growth and Demise of a Mouse Population, outlined an experiment centered around an enclosure known as Universe 25. This experiment spanned from 1968 to 1973 and utilized a strain of albino house mice as his test subject. Cahoon opened his article by outlining the 4 horsemen of the biblical apocalypse, and after transcribing them to modern terms, described how his enclosure accounted for all of them. This is an interesting factor as it actually doesn't result in death, simply the migration of an animal to a different location. This is a key factor in a population's decline. Cahoon prevents this with the physical structure of Universe 25, which includes 4 54-inch high walls, the top 17 inches of which is made out of unstructured galvanized metal. This setup makes escape practically impossible. Food, water, and shelter are the basic resources in which we think necessary for survival. Universe 25 was amply prepared for all these factors. The enclosure had a multitude of tunnels, which were vertically stacked. These tunnels led to a total of 256 nest retreat sites, each of which could comfortably rest 15 mice for a maximum comfortable housing capacity of 3,840. Food wouldn't become a limiting factor until a mouse population of 9,500. And water wouldn't become a problem until a population of 6,144. Food and water was supplied through hoppers located throughout the structure. These capacities were never reached as the mice ran into other problems. The maximum population only ever reached 2,200. The weather was regulated throughout the experiment. In the winter months, the temperature was kept close to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and during the summer months, temperature ranged from 70 to 90 degrees. Air movement was kept low. These weather conditions remained stable and had no effect on the morality of the mice. Disease can be a huge factor in the health of a population. The mice used in this study were obtained from the National Institute of Health's breeding colony, where extreme precautions are undertaken to prevent disease. Every 4 to 6 weeks, the ground corn cob was removed from all the nest boxes and floor, along with accumulated feces. This experiment took place in a controlled environment. No predators were present. Cahoon categorized this experiment into 4 notable phases, the beginning of each representing a notable change in the behavior of the population. The experiment began when 4 pairs of 48-year-old albino house mice were introduced into the universe, after each mouse had been isolated for 21 days following weaning. There followed 104 days before the first litters were born, which was marked by much social turmoil as the mice became accustomed with their surroundings and each other. This phase was defined as a period of rapid growth, where the population roughly doubled every 55 days. The population went from 20 to 40 to 80 to 160 to 320 to 620 over the course of 5 doublings. Distribution of birthplace provides insight into the social organization that developed, which can be seen in this. The square outline represents the walls of the enclosure, while the black boxes represent the location of food hoppers. Between each 2 hoppers, there are 4 sets of walk-up apartments, each containing 4 nest boxes accessible by a single tunnel. As seen in the diagram, the mice tended to be heavily concentrated in certain nest boxes, while others remained completely unused. This uneven distribution is because of the clustering of females into brood groups. The productivity of a brood group could be taken as an index of social status. The most dominant male always associated with the brood groups that produce the most young. Each dominant male during this phase had an area of the floor defended as his territory. This setup of territory and brood groups led to a period with maximum exploitation of resources, and consequently, an explosive increase in population. On average, each group contained 10 mice, including a territorial male, associated males, and females, and their young. At the end of Phase B, there are 470 of these young mice, which is much more than would naturally exist. Phase C started at day 315 and lasted for a period of 245 days. During this period, the population of mice doubled only every 145 days instead of the previous 55. The unusually high number of young born during the previous phase to reach maturity and proceeded to contest roles in the societal structure. Many males failed to integrate and as a result withdrew physically and psychologically. As a result, these males, who would normally migrate away from the community, with nowhere left to go, became inactive and aggregated in large pools near the center of the floor. They no longer fought for status and subsequently became purposeless. They instead attacked each other and became characterized by their many wounds and scars. These mice were easily provoked and often didn't flee when they got attacked, as they had nowhere to flee to. Female counterparts to these mice often fled to higher nesting boxes that were less preferred for females with litters. Territorial males, now forced to reject many maturing young, failed to keep up with their territorial defense. This left nursing females extremely vulnerable. As a result, many were forced to defend their own litters from the invasion on their nest sites. This created nursing females who were much more aggressive than normal, essentially having to take over the role of the territorial male. This aggression was often turned on their young, who were attacked, wounded, and forced to leave home prematurely. Similarly to Calhoun's previous experiments, females attempted to move their young to several sites, and many were abandoned on the way. Young were often wounded in delivery, and overall fetal mortality skyrocketed. These problems continued to worsen until the end of Phase C, at which point societal organization was essentially dead. Phase D began on day 560, at which point population increase abruptly ceased. The last surviving birth took place on day 600, after which the population began a steady decline. The last conception took place on day 920, at which point the society's fate was sealed. This fate was set in place throughout Phase C. Young being rejected early by their mothers meant those mice would start independent life without having developed adequate effective bonds. This leads to failure to mature into more complex social behaviors like courtship, mating, and aggression. The majority of females at the end of Phase C had never conceived and had staggeringly low embryo counts. The counterpart to these non-producing females were males who had never engaged in sexual approaches, nor fighting, and as a result had no wounds or scar tissue, and were called the beautiful ones by Calhoun. Their days consisted of eating, drinking, sleeping, and grooming, none of which carried any social implications. The mice during this phase essentially lost the ability to reproduce. Even taking these mice out of the crowded population and pairing them with adequate sex partners proved fruitless. Without the ability to reproduce, the society was dead. Calhoun's Universe 25 paints a horrifying picture. A society of mice were given everything they needed to survive, and they reached soaring heights until their own success killed them. The population density created a complete societal breakdown, one that had permanent implications for its offspring, one that couldn't be escaped even when population decreased. The stress invoked by such high population density meant mothers couldn't raise their offspring into effective adults. This trend that occurred in Universe 25, the trend that Calhoun describes as a behavioral sink, is present in our society. Although Universe 25 can be seen as an extreme example, there is no reason why humanity won't reach those heights if free to do so.